The world is divided into 4 spheres, each sphere divided among continents and nations. Nations are divided by borders and interests. These interests divide the news. We examine the impact of these divisions on people and power. This is Imaginary Lines. Welcome to the program. I'm your host, Michael Fox. On December 6th, Venezuela's opposition overwhelmingly won elections to the country's National Assembly, picking up a supermajority in parliament. The victory has inspired members of the opposition to threaten a massive backlash against government policies and programs once they're inaugurated in January. The U.S. government and also the international media have joined the fray. International analyst Alexander Main was in Venezuela for the elections. I'll speak with him about the feeling on the ground, the U.S. government response, and the reaction from the mainstream media. But first, let's take a look at some of the concrete proposals that the opposition is looking to implement once they're inaugurated in January. On Sunday, December 6th, the opposition won control of Venezuela's National Assembly by a wide margin. President Nicolas Maduro immediately recognized the results, and the opposition, which will now control 2/3 of parliament, will be inaugurated on January 5th. The morning after the vote, the leading figures of the opposition began to make their intentions known. They've set their sights on 2 of Venezuela's state-owned outlets, the national broadcaster VTV and the National Assembly TV station, calling the workers an embarrassment and threatening to shut them down or take them over.
El que trabaje se queda y el que no trabaje se va. Camarada, porque nosotros no vamos a tener vagos ni vagas en ninguna parte. Los trabajadores, pueden reunir a los trabajadores del sindicato A, del sindicato B, del sindicato W. Emitan las proclamas que quieran, emitan los decretos que quieran. Nosotros, la nueva mayoría, vamos a llegar para hacer las cosas bien.
Henry Ramos, the Secretary General for one of the parties within the opposition, also attacked the 1999 Constitution, which was approved under the late President Hugo Chavez by popular referendum with over 70% support. Columnists and even the U.S. government have called for Maduro to work constructively with the opposition-controlled assembly, conveniently leaving out that the opposition has already said that one of its goals is ousting Maduro from the presidency. All of this points to an impending attack in the coming months on labor rights, equality, inclusion, and local participatory democracy. Essentially, a push to return to the neoliberal past. Venezuela's opposition handily won the December 6th National Assembly elections. When the new representatives are inaugurated in January, they will have the numbers to call for a referendum to oust President Nicolas Maduro, reappoint Supreme Court justices, and call a special assembly to make changes to the Constitution. The opposition coalition MUD has vowed to seek to remove Maduro from office and make sweeping changes to the Constitution. There's a lot at stake, but there are also a lot of forces at play, including the U.S. government and mainstream international media that have weighed in on the results in the days following the elections. Alexander Main is the Senior Associate for International Policy at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington. He focuses largely on U.S. policy toward Latin America and the Caribbean, and before joining CEPR, he spent many years in Latin America as an international relations analyst. Alex was just in Venezuela, accompanying the Venezuelan elections on December 6th. Alex, thank you so much for joining me on Imaginary Lines.
Great to be on, Mike.
Alex, I thought it was interesting that less than one day after the vote, the U.S. State Department released a statement calling on election authorities to continue to tabulate the rest of the votes, highlighting that Venezuelans had voted for change and calling for dialogue with the national government. What's happening here? What's your analysis?
Well, I think what's most important to the U.S. government right now is to not be perceived as siding with the opposition, though they've very obviously done that in the past. At this point, they are focused on strengthening the opposition, and of course they've been trying to do that for a long time, and they're getting much closer to this goal now following the elections, and they're very much aware that any association of the opposition with the U.S. government would hurt the opposition, particularly as in these elections it's fairly clear that a lot of those that voted for opposition diputados, for representatives in the National Assembly, were not really voting for the opposition so much as they were voting against some of the current policies, the government and the current economic situation, and so on. So the opposition, I would say, has a very, very tenuous majority. And I think the U.S. is focused on helping them bolster their strength in the country, and quite aware that if they were seen to be very supportive of the opposition, that would simply damage them.
For you, what have been some of the most blaring misrepresentations or distortions in the mainstream press in the aftermath of the elections?
I think the thing that's really troubling is that had Chavismo won, and there was certainly a chance that they could have won a simple majority. I mean, you can win a simple majority. It was fairly clear that they weren't going to win a majority of the vote, but even with 43% of total votes, the system is configured in such a way that one can still win a majority of seats in the National Assembly. And that seemed like it could happen this time around. And had it happened, I think you would have had a very, very different reaction. Everything would have been heavily questioned, and I think it's highly probable that the opposition never said in advance that they would accept the results of these elections. They had very inflammatory rhetoric about having to defend, the vote in the streets and so on. And I think we would have seen a very different reaction both from the opposition and from the major media. As it is, we're seeing slightly more balanced coverage to the extent that they are now recognizing that there is, in fact, a democracy, a functional democracy in Venezuela. And of course, they're recognizing this because the democracy has gone in the favor of a U.S. ally in the form of the Venezuelan opposition.
Alex, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Mike.
And now for a look at some of the concrete international media distortions around the Venezuelan elections. And that's it for today's show. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Michael Fox. Please join me next week.